My name is Zoe Callahan. I'm 32 years old, and up until recently, I thought I had a pretty normal life. You know, one of those lives where everything looks great on paper. I worked in a boutique marketing agency downtown Chicago, lived in a cozy two-bedroom apartment in Naperville, and I was engaged to a man who, for years, I thought was the love of my life. His name was Ryan Lewis. He had the kind of smile that made you feel safe, like nothing bad could happen when he was around. We met 5 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party in Lincoln Park, and from that moment, we were inseparable. Or at least, that's what I believed. That's what I wanted to believe. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to follow how I turned heartbreak, humiliation, and betrayal into the most powerful comeback of my life. Our relationship moved fast. Too fast, in hindsight. Within 6 months, we were living together. Within a year, we were talking marriage and kids. By year 3, we had already picked out names for our imaginary children and were arguing over school districts. And by year 5, we had rings, a wedding date, and a future so beautifully drawn in my head that I couldn't see the cracks forming underneath. My parents always had mixed feelings about Ryan, my dad especially. He said something about him didn't sit right. Said Ryan had a performer's smile, but I chalked that up to the usual overprotectiveness. My dad had always been skeptical of anyone who came too close. My mom, on the other hand, tried to give him a chance, even though I could sense her hesitations. But I didn't listen to any of them. I loved Ryan. I trusted him, and that was enough. For me, anyway. Last month, Ryan invited me to what he described as a small family dinner with his relatives. It was a Friday night, and he said his parents were hosting it in their backyard in Aurora. Just a casual thing, he told me, brushing a strand of my hair behind my ear. My mom wants to see you before things get crazy with the wedding plans. I should have known then. I should have seen the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine when he said it, the way he kept checking his phone the whole day leading up to it. But love makes you blind. It makes you believe the lie because the truth would hurt too much. When we pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was the number of cars. They were packed up along the curb, double parked even. It looked like someone was hosting a block party, not a family dinner. I looked at Ryan, confused. I thought you said this was just your parents and a few cousins. He laughed nervously. Yeah, I guess my mom went a little overboard. You know how she is. But I didn't know. I'd met his mother a handful of times. She was polite, always a bit distant. Overboard wasn't exactly her style. As we walked up the driveway, I started hearing the buzz of a crowd. Laughter, chatter, clinking glasses. The backyard was lit up like a wedding reception. String lights danced above tables covered in white linens. Music floated out from a rented sound system. And people, dozens of them, were mingling around, holding drinks and hugging like it was a reunion. 81 people. I counted later. 81 people I barely recognized. And then I saw the banner. A giant, gold-foiled monstrosity stretched across the fence at the back of the yard. "Welcome, baby!" it screamed in block letters, followed by, "We're so happy for you both." Time slowed. My mind couldn't catch up to my eyes. I looked at Ryan. His face was pale. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "What is this?" I whispered, not even sure I wanted an answer. That's when a woman I had never seen before came bounding toward us. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with long auburn hair and a stomach that made the message on the banner make sense. "Oh my God, you made it!" she squealed, throwing her arms around Ryan. And he hugged her back. He didn't even look at me. I stood there, frozen. Every laugh around me felt like it was echoing. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat, my pulse pounding in my ears. I took a step back, but the world wouldn't stop spinning. "Who is she?" I managed to ask. The girl, still clinging to Ryan, turned to me with a confused smile. "I'm Madison," she said slowly, as if I should know. "Ryan's girlfriend. You must be Zoe. I've heard a lot about you." Girlfriend. Not ex, not friend. Girlfriend. My fiancé turned toward me then. For the first time, he really looked at me, and I saw it. All of it. The guilt. The cowardice. the pathetic regret that had been eating him alive. He didn't deny it. He didn't say anything, just stood there, in silence, letting it all fall apart. I walked away. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the ring at his face or smash a wine glass or slap anyone. I just turned around and walked straight out the front gate. I drove home in silence. No music, no air conditioning, just the hum of the road and the kind of heartbreak that doesn't sting, it hollows. I spent the weekend in bed, replaying the scene over and over in my head. 81 people, a welcome banner, a pregnant girlfriend, and me, the fool in the story, the cautionary tale whispered at brunch tables and bridal showers. On Monday, I went to work like nothing had happened, but inside me, something had cracked. Something had changed. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't confused. I was cold. And I was going to make him regret everything. This isn't the kind of story where the woman forgives and moves on, where she finds someone better or learns a valuable lesson about herself and love. No, this isn't one of those stories. Because some betrayals don't deserve healing. Some wounds don't close with time. Some lies demand a reckoning. And Ryan Lewis was about to learn what happens when you humiliate someone who once loved you more than anything. You see, I don't believe in revenge as a concept. I believe in precision, in consequences, in crafting an outcome so perfect, so poetic, that it leaves the offender wondering where it all went wrong. He gave me the pieces. Now I was going to put them together. But not yet. First, I needed to smile. Smile at work. Smile at friends. Smile at the world. Because the last thing you expect from the woman you betrayed is that she's already planning your downfall. And I promise you, he never saw it coming. The morning after that so-called dinner, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection for a long time. My eyes were still swollen, the kind of puffiness that no cold spoon or concealer could fix. But underneath it all, I noticed something I hadn't seen in years. A kind of stillness. A fire that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with purpose. I didn't feel like Zoe Callahan anymore, the girl who got cheated on, who believed in fairy tales, who trusted someone so deeply that she ignored all the signs. No, I was becoming someone else. Someone sharper. Someone who didn't wait for karma to do its job. Ryan didn't try to contact me that night. Not a single call. Not a single message. But by Monday afternoon, I got a text from him. Just one line. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a few seconds, then locked my phone and got back to work. If he thought for a second that I was going to give him the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown, he had no idea who he was dealing with. I began my research that night. I dug deep into every aspect of his life, not just the pieces he showed me, but the ones he kept buried. His emails, his calendar, social media interactions, Venmo transactions, everything. I knew his passwords. He had given them to me a year ago when we were apartment hunting together. Back then, it had felt like a symbol of trust. Now it was just another weapon in my hands. That's when I discovered just how long he'd been living a double life. Madison wasn't a recent affair. Their relationship went back almost 2 years. While he was choosing wedding venues with me, he was booking weekend getaways with her. While he was meeting my parents for brunch, he was attending prenatal appointments in Aurora. And the worst part? His parents knew. They were in on it the entire time. The dinner wasn't just a surprise. It was a celebration of a life he had been building behind my back. A life I had no part in. It was like someone had taken a hammer to everything I thought I knew. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was comprehensive. It wasn't one lie. It was 1,000 carefully constructed falsehoods woven into a single, perfect illusion. I couldn't let it go. I wouldn't. But I also knew that vengeance had to be strategic. It had to be elegant. So I started building a plan, not an outburst, not some messy confrontation in the middle of a Starbucks parking lot. No, I needed to dismantle him with grace, ruin him from the inside out while smiling the whole way through. I made a list of everyone who mattered in his life. Friends, co-workers, his boss at the engineering firm in downtown Chicago, even his gym trainer. I needed leverage. And if there was one thing I had learned working in marketing for nearly a decade, it was how to craft a story people couldn't ignore. My first step was subtle. I created a burner email account and sent an anonymous tip to HR at his company. Nothing dramatic. Just a collection of screenshots showing inappropriate messages he had sent to Madison using his work phone. The kind of content that violates corporate policy but isn't loud enough to cause immediate termination. I wanted him to sweat, to live in uncertainty, to start looking over his shoulder. The next move was personal. I reached out to Madison. Not directly, of course. I created a fake identity online. Someone warm, neutral, friendly. Someone who worked in a mom's support group in Naperville. I joined forums, shared made-up anecdotes, and eventually became someone Madison could open up to. Over the span of a few weeks, she spilled everything. How Ryan told her I was just a friend from the past. How he'd promised to leave me after the wedding. How he said he was only with me for appearances until she was ready to go public with the pregnancy. It was all worse than I imagined, but it gave me fuel. Meanwhile, I kept playing the part of the broken ex-fiancé in public. At work, I acted like I was slowly recovering. I shared half-truths with friends, never enough for them to be suspicious, just enough for them to think I was trying to heal. But privately, I was preparing the final phase. I took a trip to a printing shop and had custom wedding invitations made, the ones Ryan and I had designed months before. Except these were altered. The date had been changed to a week from Saturday, and instead of my name, the bride listed was Madison. Then I printed 50 of them. I sent them to everyone. His work colleagues, his extended family, old college friends. I even sent one to his boss's wife, and on the back of each envelope, I included a link to a private web page that contained the full archive of his lies. Messages, photos, bank records, hotel bookings, a digital dossier of deception. I knew the fallout would take time, so I waited. And while I waited, I smiled. 3 days later, Ryan called me. Not texted, called. That alone told me things had started to fall apart. "What did you do?" His voice was thin, tight. I could hear the panic crawling underneath every syllable. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, staring out the window of my apartment as if I hadn't been planning this moment for weeks. "You're trying to destroy my life," he hissed. "No, Ryan," I said calmly. "You already did that. I'm just documenting it." He didn't speak for a few seconds. I imagined him pacing in whatever apartment he was hiding in now, the one he shared with Madison. Or maybe he'd been kicked out already. Maybe she'd finally seen him for who he was. "You're insane," he whispered. "Maybe," I said, still staring out the window. "But I'm not a liar." He hung up, and just like that, I knew I had him. Because nothing shakes a man more than a woman who doesn't scream, doesn't cry, doesn't beg, just smiles and waits for him to drown in his own mess. The next day, I got a message from one of his coworkers, a woman named Jenna, who had always kept her distance from me before. She said she admired my strength, said she'd seen the files, said everyone was talking, and then she added one last thing. "He got put on leave this morning. No official reason, but we all know why." I felt nothing, not joy, not closure, just silence. And in that silence, a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Because the deeper I dug, the more I realized Ryan wasn't just a cheater. He was a manipulator, a habitual liar, a man who didn't just betray, he orchestrated betrayals. Layer after layer of deceit built on the assumption that he'd never be caught, that I was too sweet, too trusting, too in love to see the truth. But he underestimated me. He forgot that I was raised by a father who could read people's eyes better than their words. He forgot that I had a spine forged in corporate boardrooms, trained to turn setbacks into strategy. He forgot that betrayal doesn't just leave a scar, it sharpens the blade. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. My plan was never about theatrics. I didn't want him ruined in one big explosion. I wanted a slow collapse, one he would feel with every breath, every voicemail, every unanswered email. The kind of destruction that begins subtly, just out of reach, until one day the ground beneath you simply doesn't exist anymore. And it was working. But something shifted the moment I received the voicemail from Madison. She didn't sound angry. She sounded devastated. And that wasn't what I expected. I thought she'd be furious at him, maybe even grateful toward me for exposing the truth. But instead, what I heard in her voice was the sound of someone who had believed everything, Someone who had built her world around a man who promised her forever and then let it all burn for nothing. She cried on the message, said she didn't know where Ryan was, said he left in the middle of the night, said she was scared, alone, 31 weeks pregnant and betrayed. I played that voicemail 5 times. Not because I felt sorry for her, not because I was second-guessing myself, but because it confirmed something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment. Ryan wasn't just reckless with love. He was a coward, a professional deserter, a man who ran the moment accountability knocked on his door. And that, to me, was worse than any infidelity. That's when I made the decision to take it further. I'd initially thought of Ryan as the target, the center of the storm I was building, but what I realized was that he wasn't alone. People helped him lie, covered for him, enabled him. His parents, for starters, who smiled at me across dinner tables knowing full well that their son was splitting his life between 2 women. His best friend Jared, who high-fived him during our engagement party after some crude half-joke about locking one down. Even his co-worker Marcus, who once slipped up and said, "Don't let her find out," during a company happy hour. They were part of it, and now they would be part of the consequence. I booked a table at a restaurant downtown, one that Jared loved. He posted about it at least once a month on his Instagram stories. I made a reservation under a fake name, and then I waited in the bar, out of sight. I knew Jared would show up, and he did, right on time, walking in with a woman who wasn't his wife. I took a photo, then another, one from the bar, and one later outside when they kissed near the valet stand. Then I found his wife on Facebook. She was easy to find. Her profile was filled with photos of their 2 kids, birthday parties, holiday dinners. I sent the photos from an anonymous email. No note, no explanation, just the truth, delivered in images. 3 days later, Jared deleted all his social media accounts. Then I moved on to Marcus. I waited outside his building, the one with the glassy lobby downtown where employees badge in with a beep. I dressed in black, hair tied up, glasses on, looking like any other tired professional. When I saw him coming, I slipped an envelope under his windshield wiper. Inside, a printed transcript of a conversation he'd had with Ryan, bragging about playing 2 lives like a game of chess. I'd found it in Ryan's old iCloud backup from a voice memo he never deleted. I don't know what Marcus did with it, but by the next day, his fiancée had scrubbed him from all her social media. Photos gone, bio updated. Single mom of 2. Stronger than ever. That part, I smiled at. Each act wasn't just retaliation, it was a message. You're not untouchable. You're not invisible. Every laugh you shared at my expense, every lie you helped protect, every time you looked me in the eyes and thought I was too naive to see the truth, I remembered it all. And now, so would you. But amid all of this, something unexpected happened. People started reaching out to me. Not just acquaintances or co-workers, but women I barely knew. Women who had once been connected to Ryan in some way. One of them, Olivia, had dated him before I met him. She said he ghosted her after 8 months, just disappeared. Another, Claire, said she'd been seeing him during what would have been the first year of my relationship with him. There were overlaps, patterns, a long string of women who all thought they were the only one. It sickened me. And yet, I felt validated. This wasn't just about me. This was about all of us. The difference was, I was the first one to strike back, and I wasn't done. I went to visit his parents. Not to yell, not to throw accusations, but to look them in the eye and let them feel the weight of what they'd helped protect. I knocked on the door of their pristine Aurora home, the same one with the backyard full of lies and banners. His mother answered, her face twisted into something between confusion and dread. "Zoe," she said, "this is unexpected. I'm not here to fight," I told her. "I just have something to say." She stepped aside, and I walked in. The house smelled like furniture polish and lemon candles. Too clean, too quiet. I sat on their floral-patterned sofa and looked at both of them as they slowly settled in across from me. "I want you to know," I began, "that I know everything. I know about Madison. I know about the dinner. I know you helped him hide it. I know you smiled at me while he lied. And I just want to ask one thing. Why?" His father didn't say anything, just stared at the floor, hands folded tightly. His mother shifted in her seat. "We thought he would come clean," she whispered. "We didn't agree with it, Zoe. But we thought, if we forced him to bring you both together, maybe he'd finally be honest." "You hosted a celebration," I replied. "You printed a banner. He lied to us too," she said. "Told us you were just his friend, that he was helping you through a hard time." The silence after that was suffocating. I stood up. "You protected him," I said softly. "And now everything he built is falling apart. I hope you realize you helped build that foundation, and I hope it hurts." They didn't follow me out. They didn't say goodbye. I walked away knowing they would sit in that silence for a long, long time. Later that week, I got another message from Madison. She wanted to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop in downtown Naperville. She looked exhausted, pale, pregnant, and alone. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, tears already welling in her eyes. "I had no idea. He told me you were crazy, that you were stalking him, that you wouldn't let go." I nodded. "He told me you were a cousin who needed a place to stay after a breakup. That's why I never questioned the second toothbrush in the bathroom." She laughed bitterly. "I should have known." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo album. Inside were ultrasound pictures, notes, a baby name list. "I don't expect you to care," she said. "But this baby, he's innocent. I'm raising him alone." I looked down at the photos. I didn't feel anger. Not toward her. Not anymore. "Good," I said, "because that's the only good thing that can come from all this." She nodded, wiped her face, and left. As I walked back to my car, I realized something strange. I didn't feel lighter. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt empty. Not because I regretted what I did, but because I realized something important. This wasn't the end. The real reckoning was still coming, and Ryan, wherever he was hiding, was going to face it. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't have a clear plan anymore. The outlines of revenge had already been drawn, and the initial strokes were finished. But now I was staring at a canvas with space left. Room not just for retaliation, but for transformation. I had spent weeks consumed by Ryan's lies, by exposing them, by orchestrating his downfall. But what no one tells you is that even vengeance, when carefully executed, leaves behind a kind of vacuum. And if you're not careful, that silence can swallow you. So I filled it with something else. I started with the smallest things, getting up early again, going for runs along the Riverwalk in Naperville. There was something healing about the water, about watching the ducks float aimlessly by while the world moved forward in spite of everything. I remembered those mornings when I used to jog with Ryan, how he would always stop halfway through, pretending to tie his shoes just to catch his breath. I had thought it was endearing. Now I saw it for what it was. Someone pretending to keep pace with you while constantly falling behind. I cleared out the apartment next. Every drawer, every cabinet. I boxed up everything he ever touched. Sweaters, cufflinks, books, cards, even a half-empty bottle of cologne he once swore was his signature scent. I donated most of it, threw the rest away. I kept one thing, though, a tiny keychain we bought on a spontaneous trip to New York 3 years ago. It wasn't about him. It was about me. That was the trip I realized I was capable of doing things without anyone's permission. I remembered how I had talked him into going, how I booked the flights, chose the hotel, built the itinerary. It was a reminder that the strength had always been mine. I had just forgotten it in his shadow. At work, I leaned in harder than ever. My boss noticed. "You've been different lately," she said during one of our one-on-ones. "More decisive." I smiled. "Sometimes clarity costs you everything." We landed a major client that month, one of the biggest in the company's history, and she credited me in the all-hands meeting. I should have felt pride, but all I could feel was the weight of everything behind me pressing gently against my back. I was moving forward, but I was still carrying it. It was during this phase that I reconnected with my father. He had been distant after everything came out, not because he didn't care, but because he knew I needed space. My dad isn't the type to say, "I told you so." He's the type to show up with coffee and tools when your kitchen sink leaks, and just sit there fixing things quietly until you're ready to talk. We were sitting in his backyard one Sunday afternoon when he finally said it. I knew there was something off about him, but I never knew how to say it without hurting you. You don't have to say it, I replied. You were right. He took a long sip from his mug. It's not about being right. It's about watching your daughter get hurt and knowing you couldn't stop it. That's the worst kind of helplessness, Zoe. I nodded. There was nothing to fix anymore, just things to understand. And in that space of understanding, something started to settle in me. Forgiveness. Not for Ryan, but for myself, for believing him, for not walking away sooner, for all the nights I stayed awake rationalizing the irrational. A few weeks later, I received a package. No sender listed. Inside was a single envelope, and inside that, a letter from Ryan. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, impatient. The ink was smudged in places. The letter was short. Zoe, I don't know where to begin, so I'll just start. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much now and maybe it never will. I've made mistakes, more than I can count. I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I lied because I was too afraid to deal with the truth, and I ran because I couldn't face the consequences. Madison left. She took the baby and moved to her sister's in Michigan. She doesn't return my calls. I lost my job. I lost everything, really. And I know you had something to do with it. I guess I deserve that. Probably more. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wouldn't even know what to do with it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For the lies. For the betrayal. For not being the man I pretended to be. Take care of yourself, Ryan. I read it once. Then again, I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel much of anything, which surprised me. I had imagined this moment, the apology, the collapse, for so long. But when it came, it was like a knock on the door after a storm has already passed. You open it, expecting thunder, but all you get is quiet. I didn't write back. Instead, I kept living. I signed up for a ceramics class at a local studio in town. I had never worked with clay before, but there was something incredibly satisfying about shaping something with your hands, something that starts off misshapen and soft and slowly takes form. My instructor said I had a natural eye for balance. Maybe it was all the chaos that trained me to crave symmetry. I met people. Not romantically. Not yet. But in ways that reminded me I was still capable of connection. A woman named Priya who had just gone through a divorce. A teenager named Kelsey who was making bowls for her college dorm. We shared stories, laughed, encouraged each other. It felt good to create something and not have it tied to pain. One night, as I was closing up the studio, Priya asked me, "Do you ever wish you'd never met him?" I thought for a moment. No, I said honestly. Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have met myself. It wasn't just a line. It was the truth. I had always been strong, smart, resourceful. But I had also been too eager to be chosen, too desperate for a version of love that came with approval, rings, timelines. What Ryan did to me didn't change who I was. It revealed it. It forced me to look at the woman in the mirror and realize she had been enough all along. And yet, I knew the final piece was still missing. Closure, not just for me, but for the chapter I never truly closed. So I wrote a letter, not to Ryan, to myself. Dear Zoe, you survived. Not just the lies, not just the loss, but the echo of all the things you once believed. You turned betrayal into clarity, anger into motion, and pain into art. You are not defined by what was done to you, but by what you chose to do next. I am proud of you. I forgive you. I love you. Me. I folded the letter and tucked it inside the little keychain box I had saved. Then I locked it away in my closet, not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to remember the journey, not the man. Healing doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It sneaks in like a draft under the door, growing stronger the longer you let it in. And slowly, piece by piece, it begins to fill the places grief once hollowed out. I didn't need Ryan's downfall to feel whole, but it helped to know he finally understood what it was like to lose something real. The summer air had begun to shift, the early evenings in Naperville growing just a touch cooler, that subtle hint of approaching fall whispering in the trees. Life was quieter now, steadier, and yet, deep inside, something remained unfinished. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't even anger. It was instinct. that subtle, unrelenting sense that there was still one page left unturned. I had done everything I set out to do. Ryan's carefully constructed house of cards had collapsed, and I had watched every card flutter to the floor, but something still lingered. A thread, a pulse, something unresolved. I hadn't seen him since the night of the dinner. No texts since his letter. No phone calls. It was as if he'd been erased. And in some ways, that should have been enough. But closure isn't always about silence. Sometimes it's about confrontation, about walking through the last burning room to finally step outside the smoke. And I realized I needed to see him, not to scream, not to get answers, but to say the one thing I'd never gotten to say while he still looked me in the eye, the truth. Finding him wasn't difficult. He had moved out of Madison's apartment a week after she left town. He was now staying in a rundown complex near the edge of Aurora, a far cry from the luxury condo he used to brag about downtown. His car, once polished every Sunday, now sat dusty and dented in the lot. I parked 2 rows away, watching it for a minute, letting the weight of everything gather in my chest. I walked slowly up to the building, found his unit, 4C, and knocked. It wasn't a hesitant knock. It was deliberate, grounded. I didn't know what he would do when he saw me. Slam the door, beg, apologize again. But when he opened it, he didn't do any of those things. He just looked tired, thin, his hair longer than I'd ever seen it, eyes sunken, like he hadn't slept right in weeks. "Zoe," he said, stunned. I said nothing. He stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment was small, barely furnished. A half-inflated air mattress sat in the corner of the living room, surrounded by discarded takeout containers and 2 suitcases that hadn't been fully unpacked. It smelled faintly of old food and something else. Regret, maybe. Or maybe that was just me. He sat on the edge of a cracked vinyl chair, his hands clasped between his knees. I stood across from him, arms folded, steady. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I needed to see you," I said. "To say what?" I paused, took a breath. "To say that I meant everything I ever gave you. Every word, every dream, every promise. I loved you with a kind of trust I didn't even know I was capable of. And you didn't just betray that. You exploited it. You took it, wore it like armor, and used it to protect your lies." His jaw tensed, but he didn't look away. I continued. "You didn't break my heart. You broke the part of me that believed love could be safe. And I want you to carry that. Not because I want you to suffer, but because I want you to know what you cost." He closed his eyes, exhaled. "I never wanted to hurt you. But you did," I said. "Not once. Over and over again. And you let me believe I was crazy when I started to question things. You made me doubt my own instincts. That's not just a mistake. That's calculated." He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just nodded slowly, staring at the floor like it held the answers he'd long stopped seeking. "I've moved on," I said. "But moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means acknowledging everything and choosing to carry only what helps me grow." "I'm glad," he whispered. "And one more thing," I added. "You didn't ruin me. You revealed me. You showed me exactly how strong I could be when everything fell apart. I don't thank you for it, but I won't let you own it either." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Zoe, I still dream about you." I paused at the door. "In those dreams," he said, "you always turn around and look at me like you used to, like you believed in me." I didn't turn around. That Zoe is gone, and I walked out. That should have been the end, and maybe it would have been, if not for what happened next. 3 days later, I got a call from Madison's sister. I didn't know her well, but we'd exchanged a few messages since everything had come out. She sounded frantic. "Have you seen him?" she asked. "No," I replied. "Not since earlier this week. He showed up at my sister's house yesterday, drunk, screaming, said he wanted to see the baby. But the baby's not even born yet, Zoe. He was out of his mind. He broke a window." I gripped the phone tighter. "Is she okay?" "She's shaken, but safe. The police filed a report. She doesn't want to press charges, yet." I sat down, breath caught in my chest. Ryan's descent wasn't just sad. It was dangerous. He was unraveling faster than anyone expected. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about how quickly a man could fall, How someone who once seemed so composed, so charming, could become unrecognizable. But I also thought about how often women are left to pick up the pieces of broken men, how we're expected to absorb their mistakes, forgive their spirals, cradle their regrets like fragile porcelain. Not anymore. The next morning, I drove to the Aurora Police Department. I gave them a full statement. I told them what I knew, what I had seen, what he had said to me. I told them about the manipulation, the double life, the escalation. It wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. It was protection. For Madison, for her baby, for myself. They thanked me, said it helped, said they'd be keeping an eye on him now. And that's when I felt it. Peace. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just peace. The storm had passed. The wreckage was still there, but the sky was clearing. I spent the following weekend with friends. Real friends. We cooked pasta in my kitchen, danced to old playlists, laughed until our stomachs hurt. At one point, someone spilled red wine on the carpet, and we all screamed, then laughed even harder. I looked around the room and felt full, not just of food or joy, but of life. Later that night, I stepped outside onto the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the unraveling, the revenge, and I realized that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's knowing you stood your ground while the world tried to pull it from beneath your feet. Ryan would carry the weight of his choices for the rest of his life. And me? I'd carry the strength I found inside that chaos. The courage I never knew I had. That was the real ending. That was the beginning of everything else. The first time I smiled without hesitation again was 2 weeks after that night on the balcony. I was standing in line at a bakery on Jefferson Avenue, waiting to buy a lemon tart for my neighbor's birthday, when a child behind me tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed to me. "She looks happy," he said with the innocent honesty only children possess. It caught me off guard, not because it was untrue, but because it was. And I hadn't realized it until that moment. I had spent so long thinking happiness was something I had to earn through someone else, that it had to be handed to me, confirmed, validated. But now, it was something I carried, something I didn't need to chase. It lived in my laughter, in my stillness, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had walked through fire and come out of it stronger. Ryan never reached out again after that incident with Madison. As far as I knew, he had moved to another town, Rockford maybe, looking for a new start. Someone told me he was working as a delivery driver, keeping his head down, trying to stay out of trouble. I didn't feel vindictive hearing that. I felt distant, as if I were watching the story of a stranger. The man I once knew no longer existed, if he ever really had. Madison gave birth in late September, a healthy baby boy named Elias. She sent me a photo through her sister. No note, just the image. His eyes were closed, his little hands curled into soft fists, wrapped in a blanket that read "Miracle" in stitched cursive. I looked at that photo longer than I expected to, not because I felt a connection to the child, but because he represented a kind of purity in all this wreckage. He didn't ask for this story. He would grow up never knowing the depth of what his parents had done to others and to each other. And maybe that was a blessing. I began to keep a journal again. I hadn't written in years, since college really, but I found that putting things into words helped me breathe, helped me untangle the threads that still tried to knot themselves in my chest. The first entry I wrote began like this: "Today, I chose peace over closure." And it felt true. The people around me changed too. Some friends disappeared, uncomfortable with the transformation I had undergone. Others, the real ones, drew closer. Priya became one of my closest companions. We spent Thursday evenings drinking tea and watching classic films. Sometimes we didn't even speak, just existed in the same room, comfortably, without explanations. She had her own scars, and we learned how to let them show without shame. My job evolved as well. After the success of that major client, I was offered a leadership role, creative director for the firm's Midwest division. I accepted, not because I needed the title, but because I wanted to prove something to myself, that I could lead, that I could create, that I didn't need anyone's permission to grow. At the team meeting where my promotion was announced, I gave a short speech. Nothing rehearsed, just from the heart. Don't wait for someone to choose you, I said. Build something so strong that you choose yourself. It wasn't a line I planned, but the room went still, and I saw in their eyes that it landed, that they understood. I started traveling again. Short weekend trips at first. Galena, Door County, a quick flight to Denver. Just enough to breathe new air, to remember how big the world was, how small my past had become in comparison. I took photos, not of myself, but of places, sunsets, bridges, shop windows, little things that reminded me of wonder. I didn't post them online. They weren't for show. They were for me. One weekend, in a small art gallery in Minneapolis, I saw a sculpture that stopped me cold. It was a twisted metal frame, bent and melted, but inside it was a small glass orb, perfect, untouched. The artist's note read, "Even fire cannot reach everything." I stood in front of it for nearly 10 minutes. Then I bought a print of the piece and hung it above my bed. Every morning when I woke up, it reminded me. My core remained, untouched, intact, still mine. The anniversary of the small family dinner came and went. I didn't mark it, didn't light a candle or cry or pour wine in memoriam. It was just another day. The power it once had over me had faded, like the afterimage of a flame once it's been extinguished. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't even need the memory. What I needed was the life I was creating in its place. There was someone new eventually. His name was Caleb. We met at a bookstore in downtown Naperville, both reaching for the same worn copy of a Joan Didion essay collection. He had kind eyes and a quiet laugh. He didn't ask for too much too quickly. He let me speak when I needed to, and stay silent when I didn't. We started slowly. Coffee, walks, shared playlists. The kind of romance that doesn't announce itself. It unfolds gently. I told him the truth about my past, piece by piece, and he never flinched. He never tried to fix it. He just listened, held my hand, made me feel seen without being dissected. One night, as we sat on my couch with our legs tangled and a record humming softly in the background, he looked at me and said, "You don't scare me, Zoe. You inspire me." And that, I realized, was what I had been waiting to hear all along. Not a promise, not a plea, but recognition. I still had scars. Emotional ones, mental ones, the kind you don't show but always feel. But they weren't raw anymore. They were reminders. I wore them like quiet armor, not to keep people out, but to remind myself how far I had come. The final piece fell into place on a crisp November afternoon. I was walking along the river with a thermos of hot tea, watching the trees shed the last of their leaves, when I saw a young couple across the bridge. They were laughing, bumping shoulders, playful and warm. For a moment, I remembered what it had been like to feel that carefree, but I didn't feel envy. I felt gratitude, because I knew something now that they didn't. I knew what it meant to break and rebuild, to lose everything and still choose to love. That night, I wrote the last page of my journal. It simply said, "This isn't a story about betrayal. It's a story about becoming, and I am becoming more myself with every breath." Then I closed the book and went to sleep with the windows open, the air cool and clean, the night outside full of unknown things, and I wasn't afraid. 1 year later, I hosted a dinner party. A real one this time. Nothing dramatic, no secrets lurking beneath the tablecloths, no betrayals bubbling under forced smiles. Just 6 people, friends who had stayed, friends I had chosen, people who had seen me unravel and helped me stitch the pieces back together. There was laughter, real and loud, the kind that doesn't echo off the walls awkwardly but settles deep in the room like warmth. We sat outside on my small balcony, strung with soft lights and filled with the scent of garlic and rosemary. The table wasn't fancy, the plates didn't match, but it was beautiful because it was honest. And that, I realized, was what I had craved all along. Honesty, wholeness, not perfection, but presence. Caleb sat beside me. He'd become a quiet constant in my life, the kind of person who doesn't rush healing but gently walks beside it. He never tried to erase my past or compete with it. He simply respected it, and in doing so, helped me move forward without fear. That night, as the candles melted low and someone turned on a playlist that made us all a little nostalgic, he leaned in and whispered, "You look happy." And I was. Not just in that fleeting way people mean when they say it to be polite, but in the way that's real. The kind of happiness that feels earned, rooted, something planted deep and tended with care. Later that week, I received a letter from Madison. This time, handwritten. Inside was a small photo of Elias, now almost a year old, with big brown eyes and a tuft of hair that stood straight up. The letter wasn't long. "Zoe, I just wanted you to know we're doing okay. I found a job at a local daycare, and my sister is still helping out when I need rest. Elias is healthy, strong. He likes music, hates peas, and giggles every time I say banana. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened between all of us, but I've stopped trying to. I've decided to focus on what I can control, who I become, and who he becomes. Thank you for whatever part you played in pushing me toward that. I hope you're doing well. You deserve peace." Madison. I held that letter in my hands for a long time. It didn't bring back the sting of betrayal or reopen old wounds. It simply felt like the last note in a long, messy song, bittersweet but resolved. I didn't write back. There was nothing more to say. We had both moved on in our own ways, carrying different pieces of the same broken past. A month later, I visited my parents. It had been a while. Life got busy, and sometimes you forget how important it is to return to the places that shaped you. My mother greeted me with her usual quiet concern, her eyes scanning me as if checking for invisible fractures. My father, ever the observer, simply hugged me and said, "You look taller." I laughed, but part of me understood what he meant. There's a way you carry yourself after survival. Shoulders squared, head steady. You may not be taller in inches, but you've grown. We sat in the backyard, the same place where he once told me he couldn't protect me from heartbreak, the same place I once cried quietly, ashamed of how much I had ignored. But this time, there were no tears, just quiet conversation and the smell of grilled vegetables on the air. He asked me if I ever thought about Ryan anymore. "Not really," I said truthfully. "Sometimes he passes through my mind, like background noise, but he doesn't live there anymore." My dad nodded. "Good. That man never deserved a permanent place in your story." "No," I said, but he taught me how to write the rest of it. We toasted that night with iced tea and old jokes. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I wasn't performing strength. I was simply living it. By spring, I had started a side project with Priya, a podcast where we invited women to share stories of resilience, not always about betrayal, sometimes about career pivots, motherhood, health scares, identity crises. The theme wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. Every week, we sat across from someone brave enough to put their pain into words. And every week, we were reminded of the same truth. Survival doesn't always come with applause, but it always deserves it. One of our guests, a woman named Clarissa, shared a phrase I never forgot. "There's no such thing as starting over. You only ever start from where you are." That stayed with me, through every recording, through every walk by the river, through every quiet moment where I almost felt the old doubts creep in. One rainy afternoon, I passed by a bookstore window and saw a display that made me stop. A single sign, "Rebuild yourself, one chapter at a time." I walked in and bought a blank journal, the same brand I used when I started writing again after Ryan left. But this one, I decided, wouldn't be about the past. It would be about everything ahead. The first page said, "Today, I am the author." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was mine. I wrote in it every morning, small entries, observations, even poems, things I never thought I'd be brave enough to put on paper. Things like, "I trust myself," or "I no longer need someone else to make me feel chosen." It was raw, honest, and healing. Caleb read a few pages one morning over coffee. He looked up and said, "You're not just healing, you're blooming." And it hit me then, how far I'd come, from betrayal to rebirth, from collapse to creation. Not because someone saved me, but because I decided to rescue myself. There's a kind of woman the world doesn't expect, the one who forgives herself first, who walks through fire and doesn't look for applause on the other side, who refuses to let someone else's lie become her truth. That's who I had become, not by choice at first, but by necessity, and eventually, by strength. Years from now, Maybe no one will remember what happened. Maybe Ryan will live a small, quiet life somewhere. And maybe Madison will raise Elias to be nothing like his father. Maybe my podcast will fade, my journal will gather dust, and all the names will blur together in time. But I'll remember, not the pain, but the transformation. Because this story was never about him. It was about what I became after. And if someone out there, sitting in a moment of collapse, hears this and wonders if they'll ever be okay, I want them to know, you will. Not because the world will apologize, not because they'll wake up and say sorry, but because you will choose to rise anyway. Because even after everything, there will be a day when someone looks at you and says, you look happy. And they'll be right. Because you will be. The story ends here. But I am just beginning. Have you ever discovered a truth so painful it changed everything you believed about love and trust? Share your story in the comments. If my journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of strength, healing, and redemption. Send this to someone who may be struggling with betrayal and needs a reminder that rising from the ashes is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. May you never forget that your voice, your truth, and your peace matter more than anyone's approval.